that's true, huh?
Debbie, we'll try to not use these. Okay. And, because it should be picking up from here.
Yeah, I would think so.
So that's you, who's here?
Go ahead. Yeah, that could be you.
Here, you can use your. There we go. I'll take this one. And
And I was looking earlier, this morning the two clocks they're about on the same time again. I guess we just needed the battery today.
probably 30 seconds.
Didn't you say Josh was coming?
I think Ryan's even gonna be online.
Ryan is online.
I think he's gonna join us.
And Denise is online.
Well, we'll wait for Rachel to come right back. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started here in just a minute. And we also have a new speaker here. Deb, can you tell? How's that speaker in the ceiling working?
That's where you're on right now. So these two on the table are on.
Should they be off?
No, they should be on.
Want one more here?
I think it's gonna pick you up better there than those, because they have very short, small. Okay.
I think we only have two that are wireless,
Yeah.
Doug.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Well, and we're right under it, Doug, so theoretically.
Yeah, that's right.
Because
It was
those,
moved up this way.
Okay.
right, so I think Jeff said those just amplify in the room. Whereas this is the actual conduit.
Okay. Well, in that case, let's turn these off and
That's the one.
Okay, so to all our colleagues online, we're testing our new ceiling microphone. So please let us know if whether or not you can hear us clearly. And with that, we will open this meeting at 2:04 p.m. This is the regular weekly Commissioners Board briefing. And we have a couple of topics in mind for today. And the first is the USDA Reconnect funding with Rachel Hegarty and Chris Walker.
Chris, are you gonna be sharing a presentation?
No, I was just going to just have a discussion.
Rachel wants to tell, you can introduce him or I will. I'm not sure everybody knows who he is.
I was going to, but go ahead.
All right, so Chris Walker is a principal in an organization called NOAANet. NOAANet is owned by 9 PUDs in Washington State and one other organization. And essentially what they do is they build and administer middle mile fiber optics internet around Washington and now in Oregon. They have a relationship now for about the last 2 years with Tillamook Lightwave. And what they've done is they've helped with our management and some oversight, and also done most of the work on the grant applications that have gone in for federal money and other funding from the state of Oregon. So he's been around a long time. He's been a panelist on the annual conference that used to be in Ashland and has now moved. I would consider him an expert in broadband and local government applications and the process and all of that. And so the guy knows what he's talking about, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
How's that, Chris? Was that like you wrote it for me?
Well, I'd say I'm blushing, but I'm too old for that. Well, thank you. We have been working this USDA Congressional Spending Award now for quite some time. And I thought I would start by just setting the foundation of what this award is. And it's unique compared to what most of us are used to, and that is a USDA Reconnect competitive grant. And traditionally, a USDA competitive grant is an application cycle to create a project area in a qualified polygon for the intent and purposes of serving an unserved classification of households based on an FCC defined speed, which could be 25.3, it could be 10.2, whichever the current Reconnect program applies for at the time. And there's been 4 Reconnect programs in the past 10 years. And traditionally, Reconnect programs are awarded to privates, not as often to nonprofits, public entities, or even electrical co-ops who are also in the industry. That's the traditional funding program that we see at a USDA. But this particular Reconnect program is a little bit different because it's a congressional spending award package. And why it differs is because the awarded agency, yourselves, are given a funding package that upon award is not defined. And what I mean by that is when you put in a Reconnect application, your project is defined. You have a polygon service area, you have a construction budget, and you're building to a certain number of households that qualify. In this particular scenario, we have a budget, $3 million for phase 1, and an undefined project area. And it's up to us as the awarded agency to respond back to USDA on what that project area will look like and the finances associated with it. And that happens through a simple checklist. And the checklist is provided to us by USDA, and it's a series of general questions about the awarded agency, the county, questions about the project, the financials around it, all of which things that we worked on in the county that created a nice little project that would do some real good. And that checklist is then submitted back to USDA, and that then establishes the project, right? They now know what it is that we intend to spend our $3 million on, and with the second round, the $1 million. However, there are some significant hurdles with USDA and Reconnect, regardless of whether you go through the competitive grant application process or whether you get it through the congressional spending. In fact, one would argue that the congressional spending award is actually more challenging. So where we sit today, because of my involvement in 2 other Reconnect programs on the competitive procurement side, on the competitive application side, I'm pretty well versed on what the inevitable outcome is. But what's different here is because it's a congressional spending award, we don't get the outcome until completion of our questionnaire and our Section 106 requirements. And what I mean by that is until we get through that process, we won't see what our contract is going to look like, and we won't see what our terms and conditions of that and our obligation to serve is. So here's what I can tell you is a hurdle when that agreement does come our way. One, in order to obtain the grant, and you will sign a grant and security agreement, and the awarding agency will complete the project questionnaire, as I mentioned, and you will fulfill all the environmental expectations of that. And you will then be considered a subcontractor within that, a sub-recipient within that grant cycle. What's interesting about this particular project is this is not a Tillamook Lightwave project. This is a Tillamook County project, even though Tillamook Lightwave is acting as the advisory support operating group within this. So as we go through the questionnaire, we will inevitably get to a security and grant agreement that we will have to work through. Now, as the awarded agency, the county, you yet to have that contract in place, right? And those obligations will be what you'll be required to adhere to, and they're quite complicated. There's a CFR within the security requirements that simply states that all property and facilities purchased with the award funds must be owned by the awardee, which in this case is you and not Tillamook Lightwave. The Office of General Counsel has confirmed this, and you will retain ownership of that facility for the useful life of that infrastructure. Keeping in mind that fiber typically has a useful life of 20, 25, heck, it could even be 50 years. Secondarily, as the awarded agency, you must sign a security agreement that puts the assets that you're about to be constructed as an exclusive first lien on behalf of the federal government. And this lien has to remain superior to all other liens that are potentially held by the county. That security agreement would last for the useful life of the assets 20, 25 more years. What I know from our previous 2 reconnect projects is that if that is not allowed by law, which in the 2 I worked with as public utility districts, it wasn't allowed by law, that we had to go down an avenue of pledging revenues as our security agreement to the program. Now, again, Tillamook County being the awarded agency doesn't have a broadband operating organization. And so you would be relying, as it sits today, you would be relying on Tillamook Lightwave to have a revenue generating opportunity that you could negotiate within that security requirement with the federal government. Right now, Tillamook Lightwave's operating agreement is with Astound Broadband, and that agreement entitles Tillamook Lightwave to a small revenue share, which admittedly would be pale in comparison to the amount of money that is going to be received in this project, keeping in mind that we're serving a small amount of households in a very rural area at a very affordable costs. And so even if we could negotiate our way into a guarantee of revenues negotiation, the volume of revenues associated with that may be quite small, and as such, it may be impossible to guarantee or pledge the guarantee of those revenues within this agreement. As I mentioned earlier, we don't even have that agreement yet to understand the implications of what all this means to you. You're only relying on what I've experienced in my historical efforts with Reconnect. We won't receive that grant security agreement until we comply with all of the checklist requirements. The initial checklist requirements required us to do some environmental assessments, as I mentioned earlier, which is a financial responsibility of Tillamook Lightwave. The resulting outcome of that was a notification by USDA for us to perform a Section 106 historical analysis, which we also would be looking to hire a subcontractor to do. Right now, it's somewhere around $45,000 to complete. So if you've been doing the quick math in your head, the obligation to get through just the initial checklist, just to get to our grant security agreement, would be roughly $50,000 for the first $3 million award. That would be repeated in the second award, which is only $1 million, but we'd still would do the same environmental assessment checklist. We would still do the same Section 106 historical requirements, getting us into a position of having funded, roughly $100,000 towards this $4 million project. Now, Reconnect, we do know, has a pre-application funding allowance for reimbursables. And we know that it's 2.5%, but we only know that for the Reconnect competitive grant component of it. We do not know that for congressional spending. So we don't know whether or not we will get refunded for those expenses or not. We will know that if we were to complete them and then get our grant and security agreement and our awarding rules. Typically, those are capped. And since this is such a small amount, those pre-application expenses are going to be capped at probably 2.5%. And you never know whether or not we're going to have more environmental requirements post that particular Section 106 completion. So it's very challenging to think through all the complications legally that the county would have to adhere to in order to get to a successful contract, knowing then that you would be the asset owner in a relationship with Tillamook Lightwave, who would be the administrator, then subsequently with an operating agreement with Astound. It just feels very complicated to do so. Now, that's a very high-level summary of the hurdles. Now, there's some minor hurdles associated with that as well. Being able to effectively spend the money wisely is going to be a challenge. By the time you get through your environmental assessments, by the time you get through your grant compliance, by the time you get through your permitting and engineering, we may not really fundamentally have an impactful project. We could very easily get to $3.5 to $4 million in infrastructure. I'm sorry, from $4 million of infrastructure to about $2.5 million of infrastructure once we get through all the consultants and the engineering and the permitting fees and those kinds of things. And the reason I share that is because we have a better option. And this is just Chris Walker saying, I've been in the business for a while. We have a better option, and this is what I think it is. And if you haven't heard of, has everybody heard of BEAD?
No.
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 Okay. So there's many broadband funding mechanisms that are available for us to serve the unserved and underserved. Some of them are called RDOF. We have Community Connect. We have Connect America Fund, and now NTIA, which is one of the broadband administration organizations from the federal government, has a program called BEAD. And BEAD was a 50-state program where each state was allocated a certain amount of money based on the volume of unserved and underserved households within the state. Some states got a lot of money because they have a lot more unserved. Some states got very little because they're more adequately served. Rurality comes into play in this, and this funding mechanism essentially has given each state a certain allotment. And in Oregon, the Oregon State Broadband Office will be administering the BEAD funds in an application cycle that is forthcoming. That process is governed by NTIA and requires the Oregon State Broadband Office to submit a plan. And that plan, without going into 18 months of development, that plan essentially is how the state intends to spend their $650 million in broadband infrastructure in the state in all areas which there are unserved and underserved households, which Tillamook County has 3 school districts, all with hundreds upon hundreds of qualifying households. This funding mechanism is a competitive grant cycle that the state will award applicants by school district to serve the unserved and underserved in that particular school district. You, of course, have 3. And including your county, the school district in your county and the neighboring 2 school districts as well. Through Tillamook Lightwave's operating agreement with Astound, we have a strategy to put in a BEAD application where Astound Broadband will fund the 25% match of the grant application. We're in development right now of what the infrastructure requirements are going to be for the 3 school districts. Hypothetically, it could be $30 million in construction, of which Astound will fund 25% of it. We would put in a competitive grant application. With any luck, we would be awarded, and then we would utilize those funds to essentially do the same thing we want to do here with the Reconnect program, only on a greater scale, right? We can do more things with that money utilizing the BEAD program. If we accept those Reconnect funds, those qualifying households that are eligible for BEAD no longer are eligible for BEAD and then get removed from the list. And so now our BEAD program and the amount of available funds for that program will shrink because we'll have less households that we can serve. So the point of all that is that we have a plan that, in our opinion, is a better plan for solving the same problem. In fact, we can solve it in a better fashion without putting the county in a position to have to go through all the things that I've previously mentioned when it comes to the obligation from USDA. I'm going to stop there because I don't have anything else to say.
Good reason. Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks for that overview. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel now and ask what else do you want us to know about this?
So, yeah, I think the take home here is this is a heavy lift. It is a huge, heavy lift. And we're getting $4 million for a few miles on Highway 22, which is great. But as Chris explained, it may not even be able to go that far. The strings, and we applied for this money in spring of 2022, and we are nowhere close to a contract. So the strings that come along with it, there's so many red flags already, and we haven't even seen the agreement yet to know. So what we really need is a final decision. You know, we batted this around in different meetings and at Lightwave, but a final decision from the board. I have never been a part of rejecting a federal appropriation. So we'll certainly need to do some, you know, conversations with, Espen and, Representative Lenich's office, but, yes, we're looking for ultimately a final decision, which you can make here, because we haven't, there's nothing formal that we have yet, really. And I can talk with them if you decide to do that, on what the formal process is, if we need something in writing, or maybe they have a form to fill out, but, so that's first, and then I'm assuming you'd wanna talk about this at the Lightwave meeting next week, before anything is final. So.
Yeah, I put it on the agenda for next week.
You did, or
Yeah.
it's already on there, okay. So, yeah, I don't know if there's much to talk about here, but
Thank you.
it's too bad.
Yeah, it is too
We
bad.
have $4 million, and the amount of paperwork that and the communication with them has been horrendous. It's really too bad.
It is too bad. Yeah, I'm listening to Chris talk, I was having a heart sinking feeling like, really? We're not gonna be able to get this work done for $4 million? Good grief. But I appreciate that you talked about BEAD and that there's some hope of getting the work done. So I'd like to turn it over to our representative from Lightwave, Doug.
So I'll give you a little more background. There's grants that come along from time to time, and Tillamook Lightwave through, in conjunction with both Astound and NOAANET, had a pending grant that started last spring. And there was about $180 million, and we were hoping to get a good share of that, as much as 18 million. Unfortunately, what happened, there was some communication difficulties on both sides. Yesterday, I spent a half hour or better with the head of Business Oregon, and well, actually the broadband office, and then one of his people assigned to this account. And then separately, we brought on John Laquette, who was the business manager, he's an employee of PD, but he's also serves as a business manager for Lightwave. And so, make a long story short, the communications did not go forward as they were supposed to. So we didn't submit, Lightwave didn't submit something in a timely fashion, and we lost out on what should have been a fair chance for success, because we had received a $147,000 planning grant in preparation for that. And we were one of 9 out of 27 applicants. So between Astound and NOAANET and some Lightwave, we had a really, really good package, principally for up Highway 22. Anyway, so my point of saying all that is we now maybe have risen in the eyes of the Oregon Broadband Office a little bit by squeaking the wheel and talking to the right people, and there were apologies all around. There were some mistakes made on how they sent it out. There was mistakes made on what happened. One of the initial emails went into a spam folder. Anyway, so where we are today is we're on the radar. I also had Senator Weber come through the side door, and she did. And so they know who we are. They knew where we were all along because we communicate with them pretty regularly, but we now, out of the 67 applicants for this first round, we now may be a little higher profile, and we certainly won't make the errors that were made on either side. So from my perspective, what you've heard here is we would put a tremendous amount of effort, time, and money into something that had a relatively modest chance of being funded or funded in total. So from a business decision perspective, this might be one we set up, as you heard. Now, that doesn't mean the 650 million BEAD money, and we'll go after that 100% as deep and hard as we can, and probably have a really good chance of getting something, because we can tell a story with Lightwave that is pretty good. We've been in business now 24 years. It started out as, some of you remember, Postcom, then it became the Wave, and then Astound acquired the company. And Astound is a national company. They're closely held, but They do a lot of business up and down the west coast, like British Columbia to San Francisco, some in the Midwest and the East, and so they have an immense amount of credibility. They're one of the, I'd say, the top 5 to 7 players in Oregon and Washington and on the west coast. And then we also have NOAANET, which, as you can hear, they know what they're talking about. They've been in business about the same length of time, 24, 25 years. They've submitted lots of grants and they have a really high success rate. I'm going to say in excess of 65 or 70% plus. And so to sit this one out, you hate to do that when there's that kind of money out there. But I think the probability, and I think the other member on the Lightweight board would agree with me. I can't speak for him, but we will take it up Tuesday. The probability of getting this is marginal for the effort expended. So I'm thinking, and we'll talk this through Tuesday, we'd like to concentrate our efforts on having Lightwave as the applicant for the BEAD and take it forward from there. Part of what I have heard before is the security aspect of this. As you said, we, the county, would pledge certain revenue, possibly certain assets for almost an indefinite period of time. In other words, the federal government would take a first lien position either through a UCC filing or through some other means. And if something went wrong and we had other creditors or we needed some funding from a bank and they wanted some level of security, they would be second to the federal government. And I'm not sure that's how we want to do business on that. I have some heartburn with that, just saying, okay, we'll give the government first position. Through the BEAD program, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, the BEAD program would be secured in a different fashion. In other words, the federal government wouldn't have a position, and I'm not even sure the state of Oregon would have a position on that. Can you answer that question, Chris?
Yeah, you have 2 options. You get a letter of credit from your banking organization, or you acquire a performance bond that is for the total amount of the award. Those are just, yeah.
The strength of the commitment.
And usually your requirement there is to have an escrow agreement and then subsequently an escrow account. And so we would just obtain that through it for the amount of which the application was in coordination with Astound.
Okay, thank you. So anyway, make a long story short, I think it's the right business decision to take a pass on this. And that's what I'm going to recommend to the PUD when we meet. They're the other partner in Lightwave as of the moment. And we'll see where we go. If we have a debate, Chris will be online again. But it seems to me this is a good business decision, and then concentrate our efforts and see if we can get 15 or 20 or 25 million of the 650. And Tillamook County is underserved. And if you've ever seen the FCC maps, Federal Communication, it's really quite specific. It'll take you right down to the street level and where they think there's service and not. And our maps here are pretty good because some of you remember Samantha, who now is working for Astound. She came in as a fellow and was signed on for 2 years, ended up working 1 year. But her principal work over the year was development and refinement of these maps. And they're really pretty good. I think maybe, from what I understand, better than elsewhere. And so we know where the weak spots are. We know where we're underserved. And we know where we're not served. Like you go up the river canyons, there's very little there. You go up Highway 22 over to Hebo and out of Hebo going over to Grand Ronde, it's underserved there. And there are other places. So if we were to get 18 or 20 million or 15 or some number, we could really do some good because we have a story to tell. And the story is we're underserved. We have an older population that needs medical, telemedicine, all those kinds of things. So I'll stop talking. And so my 33 1/3% here is take a pass. But then, and I think Lightwave will say the same on Tuesday. And I don't know, Commissioner Scar is the alternate. She's pretty familiar with this stuff too. perhaps we should hear from you.
Thank you. I think a lot's been said in terms of what needs to be said. I'll add one other piece, which is that I attended a conference last year, and Paul, I think it's the one you attended this year, which was in Skamania. So I attended last year, and last year was this great rah, rah, rah from all the federal agencies saying all of this money is coming and we want to make sure it gets to the small rural communities where it's meant to be, et cetera, et cetera. So when this first came up, I reached out to the head of USDA Rural in our region, and I said, Margie, we're there. So we're at this point now where I'm being told by our contractor that this money really is impossible for us to get and use. How can you help me? That's what we talked about for 3 days at Skamania. How can you help me? The answer came back, we can't. There are a few things that you can request to waive. None of them were the heavy, heavy lifts that Chris is talking about around the security and around the environmental, et cetera. So from my perspective, that was my last holdout of hope, was that they meant what they said and that they would be willing to move mountains to make small rural communities get the money that was intended for us and to be used for us. And what I really heard was, we're really, really sorry, but that's just the way the federal government works and we can't change anything. And with that being the facts around it, I agree. As much as I hate to turn away money ever, particularly as we sit and talk about how much we need broadband all across our county, I hate to turn it away. But if we're not going to be able to actually utilize it, manage it, and it's gonna actually hamstring the county worse going into the future because of its financial requirements, I don't think it's a wise move for us. So I begrudgingly say, I agree that we shouldn't take it.
That's too bad. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
There's no guarantees even that we would get it. We would expend all this time, effort, money up front with a, I don't know what percent chance, maybe 50, maybe less, I don't know. And I'm not sure anybody knows, but every grant that I've seen over the number of years and I've been on the Lightweight Board is, they're way oversubscribed. This one where we did miss out, there were $450 million of ask for about 180. So it's, almost 3 to 1. So, you take your chances, but it's a considered business risk. Go where you at least have a reasonable chance of being in the game. And this, maybe not so much. And like I said, the biggest thing here, one of the biggest things is how you provide a security interest to the feds. I would much rather go for a performance bond or some other method or line of credit or something from a bank and say, okay, we're good for this. And we have the implicit backing, even though it's a separate organization, you have the implicit backing of the county and PD. And so, banks basically would stand in line to help you, in my opinion.
Okay. So this might be a dumb question, but it's not reasonable to try for both? Like multiple eggs in the basket? It's not reasonable to try for this funding and BEAD?
Well, I'll turn that over to Chris. What if we're gonna do the BEAD in any event, I believe. So would you
Yeah.
answer that question, Chris?
Yeah, as far as the reconnect story is concerned, we wouldn't want to accept simply because those households disqualify for BEAD. So that was part of my proposal, is let's use BEAD to fulfill the obligation of serving those identified homes. But it's a multi-grant strategy because the efforts don't end with the BEAD program that's about to open up. USDA has other programs besides Reconnect. They have one called Community Connect. Community Connect is very similar. They're usually done in $5 million tranches, and that one will open up in January. So depending on what the minimum qualifications are for that, you would suspect that there will be households within Tillamook County that would apply. And so we would look to gain, an opportunity with that program too. And, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are many broadband programs available. We have Connect America Fund, we have RDOF, all of these Reconnect, as I mentioned, all of these come out periodically. And so we just continue to stay on top of what our opportunities are, including ones that the state may produce beyond BEAD, right? The one that Commissioner Olson mentioned that we didn't get awarded, one would suspect the state will announce another cycle next year, especially if we continue to promote the value of broadband in the community.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on this?
Well, after, our meeting Tuesday at, Lightwave, you know, I'll send something out saying what the decision was there. And so kind of close the circle.
Alright, well, thank you all. Thanks, Chris, for being with us. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
You too. Okay, welcome Isabel. She's gonna talk to us for a minute about committee updates.
Everybody have a spreadsheet? So this is the list of our current committees, and this is, to my knowledge, the first time the office has ever done any kind of comprehensive review of the committees. So this is a list that we inherited with each time we came on board. Some of them are decades old, some of them there's probably half a dozen that have formed in the last 5-6 years. So in preparation for our annual liaison meeting, we thought we'd review the committees. Most of them are active, but there's quite a few that are inactive. And I highlighted those and I made some recommendations for those. So I reordered this last night, so the first couple of numbers on the left-hand side are out of sync, so just ignore the numbers. So the first committee, COPAC, the Columbia Pacific Economic Development District, is an active committee. It's, I think, a 3-year appointment. And this one, the commissioners have been fairly active in it for as long as I've been on board. We currently
We're
do not.
expected to have a commissioner representative, aren't we?
Yeah, we were required and I've been several meetings, including one in Banks a week or two ago. And so, and they're very active. They have a new director. The last one stepped down and we've got some money and so things are moving forward. So yes, they need our representation.
And we also need an alternate, it's like a backup for the commissioners, so we'd have to find someone that would take your place should you not be able to attend or to vote. So,
Meetings occur, they've been doing it as, the morning is COPAC followed by Northwest Act in the afternoon. Because there's an overlap, there's a few people leave, but most of them stay there the whole time. And it's the one at Banks here 2 weeks ago, I think there were probably close to 50 people there. So stuff happens there. It really does.
it's also connected to the Northwest Oregon Economic Alliance, and there's you need an alternate. There's always, for these committees, there's alternates. And Val Fulkemer was the alternate for a good number of years, with Van Molen that moved away and she retired. And so those positions have been open for some time. The other committee we were looking at to some action is the Building and Appeals Board, and I talked to Sarah Absher. This has been inactive for a number of years. And Sarah had, she's working with the county council to discuss the reactivation. There's currently no members appointed to it. But she's gonna talk to county council first before bringing that before the board. If I'm skipping any, Rachel, let me know.
No, I think unless the board wants to, we were just gonna highlight the ones where, just flagging appointments needed to happen, which you're probably aware of, and then recommendations for what else is correct.
Great.
The next one, the Fisherman Advisory Committee, so that's been around for quite some time, and their role has been to advise the commissioners. They would come to meetings if any topics came up. They would come and ask for letters of support or give their recommendations for items. It's a large committee. There's a lot of different categories in there that are filled, trawlers, a lot of categories. The last time Linda Buell was in charge of that, and Craig Wainwright, they were co-chairs, and Craig is no longer here, and Linda's retired, and so they don't have a chair as far as I know, and Linda and our daughter's on the committee too, said they have not met for 3 years, and they're finding it more and more difficult to fill all these. There's probably, I think, at least 18 members with categories and alternates categories also. So it's a large committee.
They had a whole lot of different categories, you're right. They also, had something to say about undersea or marine cables
They did.
coming in, like they're coming through their fishing grounds, and they spent a lot of time with their counterparts up and down the coast saying, okay, if you're gonna put this undersea cable here, you're in a sea bass area or what, a prime fishing area, so at one point, they had some impact, but like you say, I haven't heard of them for about 3 or 4 years. And I did know, I know Linda, I know who she is, and we had another guy whose name I've forgotten, but they were really quite active, but then they
Yeah, I think the last 5 years, I think I've seen them maybe at 2 board meetings with certain topics.
I think when Craig passed,
Yeah.
a lot of the momentum went out of it, probably.
They also advise the board well in their spreadsheet, the wave energy. So if any wave energy projects came around, which I know is in the South Oregon, but I don't know how long it's gonna be.
well, that's coming, so that's another, maybe want to reconstitute at some point, but.
So we don't have to make any decisions today, but regarding whether to disband or to continue.
Do we know how many members they have?
They probably have around, I would say, active, maybe, this is according to my spreadsheet, no one really knows the true number. Cause a number of the gentlemen that have been on the committee, they've been on there for a long time, and some of them have passed away, and they've been unable to replace them. So I would say, rough guess, but 12 active currently. But no one really knows because no one on their committee's keeping track, other than it was Linda and Craig. And I'm not too sure the degree of that's happening.
Was that committee brought together at the request of the board, or they were a committee that we started meeting with? Do we know historically? Whether it's our committee or whether it was their committee that we liaise with?
I think it was at the board's request,
Okay.
if I remember correctly,
Yeah, I think so
to
too.
advise on the fishing industry.
Yeah, I think it was around, well, does it say on here?
2007.
2007.
Yeah, I think that was around, there were proposals for both wave energy and wind energy. And then like Doug said, there was reaction to the undersea cables. And additionally, they reacted to the ecological zones, like the set aside, what am I trying to say? Thank you, marine reserves. Yeah, so they reacted to all those things, so, yeah.
And they used to be pretty involved in the fish passage projects, they would give their support behind that, so. I think, what I would recommend, I would go back to the committee and try and get some more detailed information from Linda's daughter. She's currently trying to get more information, and then I can bring it back to the board. This is Forest Line Committee, and that's just an update that there's no board liaison there. It's Kate Skinner's in charge of that committee, and I think they only have maybe one current appointment, and she's looking to find new members, so that one is kind of out with our hands, and it'll be updated. The Futures Council has a long history, and currently we don't have any current members, and they're on hiatus or.
Yeah, I do wanna talk about that for a minute. The Futures Council, for anybody who doesn't know, was established a long time ago, 97, for, the idea is that it would be an avenue for citizen involvement in county decisions. And it has kind of a storied past. There was a time it was really embraced by the commissioners. There was a time the commissioners didn't support it and they kind of went off on their own and they did some fundraising stuff and built a foundation with some money. There's still some money, but over time, it sort of dissipated, the work dissipated. The last real project we did on it was in anticipation of the strategic plan, and it was a good project, and it was a couple of years ago, 3. And then Jen Purcell,
who was the chair, moved away, and we didn't have a new chair and we didn't have a project. And so it just went on hiatus at that point. So I think the idea of it, the philosophy of it, that we should have a body that interacts with the public, that collects input from the public, that where the public has a way to talk about what they think about the work the commissioners are doing, I think that's a good idea. But we have to come up with a chair, pull the group back together. I think a lot of the members would come back together. They just, at the end, when Jen resigned and we completed the strategic plan process, it was kind of like, well, you know, we don't need to just keep meeting to have meetings. Let's come back together when there's a project. So we haven't brought them back together for a project. We haven't identified a new chair yet, and there's in the meantime there's the Futures Council and there's a foundation board. The foundation board is kind of dissolved, so there's money there with the foundation board that at some point we should probably address, or someone should. And additionally, the Futures Council had a storage shed, and I don't even know what's in it, and Rick Nealand, who was the vice chair, has resigned. He was paying the storage shed fees, and so he let me know recently, like, you guys need to come get this stuff, either take over the storage fees or come get the stuff. So I have no idea what's in that storage unit, and so there's all of that.
That's from the foundation?
No, I think just from the Futures
Oh,
Council. Plus, I saw Jen Purcell somewhere recently, and she said, maybe not so recently, in the last several months, and she said, one of these days when you're in Salem visiting your sister, come get the Futures Council stuff that I moved to West Salem with me. And I said, okay.
So there's more stuff.
So there's more stuff. There's stuff at Jen.
We're going to Salem anytime.
So there's stuff at Jen Purcell's house. There's stuff randomly somewhere at a storage unit. And there's money in an account somewhere from the foundation. And there's people who are ready to do the work if we call them back together.
One time, Shirley Kalkoven founded it, I think.
Yeah.
And it had quite a bit of credibility with the county, I think. I remember one meeting where you, I think, maybe not, but weren't you facilitating some discussion down at the Pelican or something?
Yeah, no, I was a volunteer at the time
Yeah.
working with the Futures Council, and it was early in some of the tourism stuff, but we were asking the communities how they wanted to use TLT in their community, and we did a series that did north, central, or actually 2 points north, central, and south, yeah.
And we're still using that information. I was just talking to Dan about it yesterday.
That was one of the most fun projects
Yeah.
I've done in Tillamook County,
Yeah.
was just to go into each community and because it was a listening, and my job was just to have the big red pen, you know, on the white paper, and it was super fun. So I would guess that what's in probably storage sheds records, probably all of the records of their founding and organization. And the part about the foundation is a little scary, because if you don't have anybody existing who was on that board, who was a signer on any of that, getting to that, because they went through that, it's been 5 years ago now or whatever, where it was really hard to get to that, and they finally got back to it.
I think it had good value at the time. I remember some of their findings and reports, you know, they added to the mix.
For
So,
sure.
I remember attending the meeting and it being kind of a who's who in the county was at that meeting to talk about what was happening in the county. It was sort of an informal networking and cross-pollination place for projects and people. So
Yeah,
it had
so
some
too.
real value in it
I
at a
think so
point,
too.
yeah. So the question is, so we don't have to make a decision now, but perhaps a commissioner wants to get assigned to that and figure that out in the coming year.
Yeah, at least, the immediate stuff. I think if we have a project that we wanna reconvene the committee to help us work on a project, to give us feedback, community feedback about a project, I think people would come back together for sure. And I also thought the work was valuable.
Would you be willing to be my liaison to the Futures Council to, if you find out from Jennifer and from Rick about
Yes.
the storage shed and the account and everything,
Yes.
we could assemble that
Unless
information.
Paul wants it.
I
Sounds
thought
like
the
you
new
are
person
the-
always
sounds
got
like
those
you're the one.
projects.
You've got all the history, you know where the shed, you probably have keys to the shed,
Bank account information.
might be on the bank account.
Yeah, you probably.
Maybe after that, I can reach back out, we can do an update and then come back. Okay. One we have and hoping Commissioner Scar can fill in some gaps here for the.
Yeah, this is a weird one. This one is required in statute, but all of the tasks of it that it used to do in statute were removed from statute, so now it just says that it exists, but it doesn't tell it what to do. So we ran into some real issues just trying to find a purpose for this committee as well, and I'm meeting with Frank at 4 o'clock, and this is one of the topics on our list because it is a required committee, so I am thinking that hopefully our Tillamook will be able to serve as that committee because it is currently the group of folks coming together to talk about substance use disorder in the community and mental health in many ways and the programs related to that, so stay tuned.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I know they had a name change and a lot of other stuff.
It was weird, cause the statute got gutted, but the program's still required, so it found itself adrift.
So up until then, all the other committees are active, other than the wellness task force.
I confess I'm assigned to that and I do not attend meetings.
Oh, sorry, that is active, sorry, that's an active one.
It is active,
Yeah.
but I don't attend meetings.
So
And I don't know if they require a commissioner. They definitely wanted a commissioner representative.
Yeah, and I think back in the days when it was Commissioner Bartling, it was more of an ad hoc committee that was pulled together. There's no bylaws, there's no rules, there's nothing really, any administrative information on it. And it's just kind of evolved. They changed their name they evolved into the Wellness Task Force, and it's now under Michelle Yank Advances Health.
It's technically a program with the health
Also,
department, so it's.
I'd be interested in this when I'm done.
Yes. Good.
I think it's more of a program than a committee.
Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah,
This becomes
it's
something-
evolved
Yeah.
much farther than, and
There-
it's under the health department now, and it's
Yeah, it's a
Advances
weird
Health.
one.
I've done a lot of work for them with my business, so I'm
Great.
familiar with
Yeah.
that. So I'm
Yeah,
fine.
there
If-
are-
If they need a commission on that,
Excellent. There is a task force and there are several, they have a strategic plan, they have a cool organization. There are different committees. I'm on a committee, I practically never go. And then additionally, there's another group that meets that's more the administrative arm of the work. And so there's two sets of meetings.
The question would be, does the board need to appoint them every year?
I think we should check with Marlene and Michelle Yank because they checked in with me last year and said, do you wanna still do this? And I said, I feel badly that I'm never there. Would you like to appoint someone else? And they just reappointed me. So I don't know if they actually need one of us or not. It's just, yeah.
Cause we don't have any of that formal information that evolved from, we don't have that in our records. I don't know what they've spelled out, what they've decided on their end as far as.
Whether or not they need us, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
cause it'll
we
become
better
a
find out.
program of its own, sort of accord separate from the committee that Commissioner Bartline started that had a real purpose of that committee in the beginning. But now it's kind of rolled into, to your point, to Health Department and Adventist Health, and it's programs for both of them that they fund and do and.
They've taken
Yeah.
on the community needs assessment, community health
Yep.
needs assessment, just
Yep.
good work.
So would you recommend I reach out to Michelle Yank and?
Find out if they
find
need
out.
a commissioner.
I think she may have mentioned it to me.
Oh, good, okay.
And tell them that it's Paul.
Yes,
You can tell.
Tell them
you
Paul
can-
volunteered.
You can talk to Michelle,
There we
tell
go.
her that
Perfect.
I volunteered if she still didn't want
Yes.
a commissioner.
okay,
So it might be just a commissioner,
that would be a release of guilt. for
fills a
me.
role, but as you see, we have to appoint all the individual
No.
committee
No.
members every year.
It's not our committee, it's not the
Yeah.
board's committee
Yeah.
anymore, so that would go away.
Okay. Emergency Management Committee, that is me, and it is active. And, sorry you didn't know that.
And when we talked about, when we stood it up, we talked about should the board appoint official members? And we decided not to have board appointed members, but there are lots of active members and we meet regularly. And Eric Swanson is our chair.
So maybe, yeah, cause we knew that was happening, so maybe what needs to happen, cause it's written as there will be appointees.
Oh, I see.
And
okay.
so if that is not how it's going to function, maybe just a board order to clean that up, so
Sure.
we're not, cause we're
Yeah.
just trying to clean up, you know, is about
Yeah.
chasing appointments and board orders and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and that would just make all that go away.
Right, because part of the thinking about not formally appointing people was we wanted people to come who felt compelled to come because they have an investment in emergency management, and we didn't want to burden the BOCC office with appointing people for terms, et cetera. We just want people who are involved to come, and they are.
And some of the older board orders I've looked at establishing these committees, just appoint a title. You know, they don't have a person's name and there's no term. So it could just be chief of police or, you know, fire district, or none.
I think I'm hearing none, just to make it more fluid and.
Yeah.
I feel like those were the conversations we had about it,
Yeah.
was just the desire for it to be fluid rather than
Yeah.
appointed.
Let me double check with Eric just to make sure he concurs, but I'm thinking that.
And similar situation with the contractors committee.
Right, we advertised for that and no contractors applied.
It's been a while since we advertised. I think we did it initially.
We've done it twice.
No, I saw Parker, Parker said there's a new contractors commission, is that something different?
He has a committee underneath the housing commission that is the development code committee, which has contractors on it. He also is looking to start a committee under the housing commission that would specifically have nonprofit housing developers. He talked to me about that yesterday, but he may have something else going
Well,
on
no,
too.
that was
I
it,
don't
he
know.
was just really surprised that he actually had some contractors on, it seemed like that was gonna be active, so I'm not sure if that's double.
It's very different focus, so the housing is really specific to housing development. This one was intended to be an opportunity to talk about basically the service sec community development and how we could be better partners with our developers through our community development process. And we advertised it a couple of times and there were no takers, but I see Sarah says leaving it pending just yet. Was that a recent note from you, Isabel? Okay, so let me chat with her when she and I have her touch base and see if she's getting some interest.
Okay.
Because maybe now's the time, maybe it just wasn't the right time. And if not, then we could perhaps disband it or put it on, whatever we do to suspend it. So that it's clear that you don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
Thank you, Isabel.
This is also a teaser to get you thinking about what committees are gonna be on next year.
I'm already doing
upcoming
it.
meetings.
Okay, this is good work, thank you.
Like Isabel,
Yeah.
Anything else? No. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so retirement RFP.
Well, I don't have it published yet, but I'm getting closer. I can find that 4-hour uninterrupted time, which is kind of hard to do.
Welcome to Commissioner Life, right?
So, what I want to do is publish a straightforward RFP that has 3 parts, really only 2. One would ask for credentials from companies or individuals on managing the portfolio, which is roughly $100 million. And then the second half of that would be the administrative side, which would be what we're doing in-house and what's done by principals. In other words, keeping track of everything, executing the orders, and so on. And what the middle part of all this is the actuary, and I don't see any reason to change Millman. They're the gold standard around America. And, you know, we were with him here a week or 2 ago, and we talked about a lot of things. And if they chose to turn in again, we'd probably end up with them. And you never know, there are others, but it seems to me that one is something that we can either take an exemption and just renew a contract or extend the one we have. But the other two, I would look at, I would explain the system that we have, and I can do that, and Jody prepared actually several pages of good stuff that I would use. I would explain the current system and without getting into a lot of detail, and I think I have a current investment policy. I have 4 versions of it, and I'm using the latest one, which was, I think, 2019, not all that old. And so I just furnish that as a piece of information. So what I would look for on both is, you know, how long have you been in business and who are your clients, and do you meet certain other criteria, and what services do you provide? And then if we got 3 or 4 firms interested or more, pick out the top 2 or 3, bring them in and have a 90-minute interview and go from there. Not like any other process, but the idea being that we've at least tested the market. We could well end up just what we're doing now, but I think there's an opportunity to subcontract it all out. I know HR does some of that now, and maybe it would be better served in a private firm, or maybe both. I don't know, but we'll never know until we ask. So that's kind of where I am on that. And the stuff I've read on the investment side, it's all there. There's nothing absolutely wrong that I can see, but I'm no expert on this, but we do have our counsel. But I would like to have more frequent reporting, say every 60 or 90 days, with some widely recognized index on how the fund is doing, compared against like the Standard & Poor 500 or the Russell 2000 or others. What we're getting now is this big 110 pages of beautiful colored stuff, and you read through it, and I know how to read most of that stuff, but I can't necessarily say, are we at the market, are we doing better or worse? You know, you really have to dig it out, and I think we can ask for that to be simplified. And this would also give us one other option if and when a future board needed to revise that for whatever reason. There might be a little bit of different information or a different base or different people going forward, or different thoughts. And I get uncomfortable when something has been going forward for 20 years. And that's my understanding, is none of this, maybe the administration side has changed, and I think it has. But the investment side has been under one firm for 20 years. And even if it's the same firm, I've always believed you test the market every 3 to 5, maybe 7 years, and see what's out there. Are we getting the best value for our money? Is there someone else or another firm that has a different approach? You know, could be the same individual, could be somebody different, but we'll never know until we ask. So that's kind of where we are. And when I've said this in our budget discussions and all, when I looked at the county's finances in depth, I was struck by the fact that the biggest single fringe benefit is retirement, which is really unusual, because nearly every balance sheet I've ever seen, the health is the cost of health care is above virtually everything else, including retirement. But we have a gold-plated retirement system here. And I'm not suggesting at all that it be changed, because we are changing with the move to the new people. But the others is going to continue on for another 20 or 25 years until everybody's retired or dies. There's 2 options. You either stick with it or you don't.
I'm hoping for 40 years, but that's okay, Doug. Some of us have longer horizons than others.
That's right. Well, there could well be, you know, who's to
Just
say?
saying.
I just, I mentioned somewhere, I just went to a good friend of ours, his 100th birthday party. So, you know, he beat Social Security, he beat every annuity, everything he did his whole life he won.
All right, say 45 years then. I'm good with that.
So that's, you know, that's one way to look at it, but realistically, we're into this for 20, 30 years. And of course, any board could change it or modify it or take it away and put it in something else. But it had, the part that bothered me the most was not the cost. It was that I didn't see any significant accountability or reporting or things, and no testing of the market for 20 years. That's a long time. So if we can get that out and get responses from 4 or 5 firms, and you go through the process, and I can almost guarantee that if we spend maybe a whole day interviewing these firms, we will know a great deal more at 5 o'clock than we did at the start of the day. And we may say, you know, we didn't understand that, or we didn't know about that, or this is what's happening elsewhere. And so I've always believed also not in reinventing the wheel. if others are doing this and they've done it and they've had some success, or they've modified whatever it is they're doing. Now, on the government side, 36, soon, 33 out of 36, soon to be 34, are part of PERS. But there are others, and there's some cities, and there's lots of other organizations that do their own retirement system. So I just want to see what the market has to say.
Okay.
So I would add a little bit to that, when I came on, Commissioner Bartline said, here's something that really should be fixed by, that's how the commissioners go, so Paul, just wait to see what's stacked on your desk from Doug when you get there.
Futures
Um,
Council.
Yeah, Futures Council, there you go, wellness, we have two of them. But part of this was just, let's look at our retirement plan, what's happening with it. And in order to get that work together, it was really hard to figure out who was our pension attorney, who was our actuarial, who all held pieces of this, because part of it was in finance, part of it was in HR, and nobody was entirely clear exactly how the whole thing fit together. Nobody felt like they had the ownership of it. I think we now have that figured out. But I think one of the other pieces to look at is a single point of contact, so that as commissioners change and staff change, there is a clear and obvious contact that has this full picture of the pension plan in their mind. And I don't know that we want that to be either in the treasurer's office or in HR, but maybe that needs to be a contracted person that understands all things pension. And I think that's part of, if I'm not mistaken, Doug, what we're looking at in here is also that administration that just says, here's an expert that can pull all that information together for us and help those of us who are not experts with our fiduciary responsibility, which we as commissioners have. So I think there's both testing the market to see if we have the best people out there, but there's also looking at an approach where we have a contracted specific pension expert to help us be the best fiduciaries, because we are legally responsible for all of this. And I know for me, that's weighed heavily on my shoulders, that as a non-pension expert, I'm supposed to have all of this information, know how to do the right thing. So I think that's something else that's embedded in this opportunity with the RFP.
I think it's fine. I feel good about checking to see what the options are. I agree with you completely that we'll learn interesting things in the process. I feel good about the service that we're getting from John Upton's firm, and it would be interesting to know how what his firm has done for us compares to other like governments, to other like plans, of like size. Like have we gotten the maximum performance out of that money in the past 20 years? I personally don't know that, because I'm for, generally speaking, if it works, don't fix it. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to get more information. I do want to get more information. Also, I'm a little bit confused about what happened with Naomi, because there was a time when we had Naomi as the HR director. She was doing precisely this, and I don't know if she didn't finish, or because I thought I remembered she was doing exactly this. She was looking for one firm who would manage all three functions: the retirement, the pension, and the et cetera. And she thought she could find that, because we talked about it several times, like, well, there are firms that do this and I don't know why we're doing this. We had the conversation several times. And ultimately, she named them, the ones that she was checking with, and ultimately she told me that it wouldn't work for us, that it wasn't scaled for us. So I don't know where any of that work went. And that's a problem with turnover, is, where are those records? So I'm a little just, I guess, disappointed that we don't have that information, because that wasn't that long ago. But there's no reason to look for it.
We may
to
have
not-
some. I have 4 or 5 fairly thick, comprehensive files that Jody turned over to me. And I've read through most of it. I'll have a look at it again. Some of it is duplication, and like the investment policy that was adopted by the board every few years. It goes back into the 60s or 70s. Even, or 80s, anyway, a long time, and it looks like it's been renewed about every 5 to 7 years. And it just says, do you do this and you can't do that, or you must ask before you do this. And it's pretty straightforward, and there's also a pretty heavy body of law that covers, people when you're spending other people's money or managing it. And you have legal, moral, ethical, fiduciary responsibilities, and you can't do things that are unreasonable. And what I've read from what's going on, there's absolutely nothing that jumps out at me, but I don't claim any expertise other than reading this stuff for 40 years. So I can speak the language, but what they do, may be something different, and it is, it's a business all of its own, has its own acronyms like in any industry, and, you know, they speak their own language, and you have to get around that and understand it. But you're quite right, there may have been an effort that I haven't seen either. So I don't like to reinvent the wheel, but I don't think this is that difficult, because we're asking, this would be more of a performance related RFP that says, here's what we have, and here's what we're doing, and here's where we're headed. Can you tell us how you would assist us, in so many words? In other words, we're not gonna say you gotta do A, B, C, D, E, and F. We're saying we want to get to F. You tell us how you would manage this, what you would do, what would you bring to the effort, and then like anything else, you sort it out and say, okay, you know, the fees are sort of irrelevant. It's what expertise do you bring, what's your track record, what have you done elsewhere, and blah, blah, blah. And then you sit and talk to these people and follow up and do what you need to do. And like I say, there's some probability we'd stay pretty much like we are. But we don't know that.
Yeah, let's get it to fruition, because clearly, Naomi was before my time, but obviously this has been a project that's been thought of multiple times, so I think it'll be exciting, as many projects we've completed recently, right? Like, we're sitting in one room here that got changed with the courtroom finally, so maybe this is one of those we can bring to fruition and wrap up, and know for sure if we're doing it the best possible way. So
Right.
that's exciting.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
for sure, because
agree.
what I think I remember Naomi said is that we couldn't afford any of the big guys who do everything, that we're not scaled for that work.
And that could
But where
well
are
be.
those records? I mean, it'd be
That's
really
a
nice if
darn
we
good
knew.
question, isn't it?
So,
Naomi's email probably got turned off, whatever
Yeah.
was exchanged.
So-
storage unit.
Right.
Oh, maybe.
So when we're
It's
done
a
with this,
shed.
let's save the records.
It's in the shed.
So, and to,
5 years from now, people can pull them up and say, oh, here's what we found out in 2024.
yes, and to that, just the pension adjustments, there's some language clarifications and things that we're gonna do, and I have this great memo from the attorney that pulls together like 5 years of conversations he's had with various people at the county related to just cleaning up some of the language in our pension plan, not changing anything that is substantive, but just defining things that terms that weren't defined in the past, but we've never gotten it over the finish line. So that I will make sure that no matter what happens, Rachel has that document and it ends up in an appropriate historical place so that we don't have to keep redoing this and we don't lose all the records, cause yeah, it's very frustrating.
All right, thank you. Thanks for doing it. All right, so the elected official job classification work. Who wants to start us off on this?
Rachel's gonna lead us through this.
Awesome.
Aaron sent the email out a few days ago and that was yesterday. Just describing the troop process and what the standard process is for doing this. Some questions were raised from the elected officials and we had a board briefing the next day today, and so we thought it was a good time to throw it on the table for discussion. And there's some outstanding questions about, that Aaron asked Troop about regarding, you know, whether counties are doing this and so on and so forth, so we're still waiting to hear back from them.
Great.
That's what we know.
Could we just start the conversation with why, what the why of why it's proposed?
So the why it's proposed is because of the same, to my understanding, I'm still catching up, is it's a consistent process that we're asking all employees to do. And in order to have a market study that compares everyone, looks at compression, looks at pay equity with supervisors and all of that, that it's looking at everybody as a whole, you know, as a whole, uniformly. With that said, certainly electeds are a little bit different. You're elected, you know, that there's the statutes that guide that work, and a sheriff is a sheriff is a sheriff, and that's example for a lot of the elected officials. There are a few situations where we have elected officials who are doing tasks that are outside of statute. And so if we forego the process of a job description or some kind of paperwork, and it doesn't have to be a job description, maybe there's another process. We can come up with whatever process we want. It's our process. This was, I guess, more of a jumping off point, consistent with what we're asking all the employees to do. So we do have a few employees who are. Josh, did you want to speak now?
You're muted.
Yeah,
Muted.
you're muted. Can you hear Rachel?
I can hear Rachel. I just didn't hit the button. I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you. You were talking about some stuff and I had information based on what you were talking about. So I just want to make sure that when you're done, I talk about it. So.
Be first in line. So we do have a few elected officials who are doing activities outside of statute, which is fine, and I think that happens in other counties. And so I think the concern that there may be is that if all of the work that electeds are doing that are not in statute are not provided to Troop, then they're not going to be given what their true classification is. So that's the root of it. We want everybody to be paid what they're paid. We're trying to do that with everybody. Not that we'll be able to get there with what the numbers come out, but that's the goal. We want this to be a transparent, equitable process, and everybody's participating, and that's why Aaron sent out the email asking the electeds to participate as well. Aubrey is not in this because she's the state employee. So, this is just kind of a jumping off point. If we want to do a different process, or some elected officials don't want to participate and others do because they have different things that they're doing that aren't in statute. So I think it's open, but at the end of the day, we do want to have a process where whoever's doing what should be evaluated. And if Troop doesn't have that information in front of them, there's a risk that I'm concerned about that. And then just kind of jumping way ahead, I'll just paint a worst case scenario that I'm concerned about is we go through the job classification study. If electeds aren't included, if electeds aren't included with everything that they're doing, and that work is concluded at the end of the year, which is the goal, and then we go into marketing, we go into the marketing study at the beginning of the year, concurrent with AFSCME bargaining that is happening, and we're working on bargaining wages that may be coming out of the marketing study, but then we're running into issues with a lot of back and forth with elected officials who are saying, they're now providing information to true up whatever the data is coming back, and then we're just getting into a lot of back and forth and extended timelines as well. So that's a little bit of a concern of mine. So ideally, and I know we don't live in a perfect world, whatever feeds into the wage study is hopefully kind of a one and done at this step. Not that there won't be truing up, because there will be, but extensive back and forth is really going to delay, I think, potentially to delay some of the AFSCME bargaining. So that's the goal. But we can write the process and decide how electeds want to fit into this or not.
Thank you. Okay, so I appreciate the conversation, and I'm glad we're starting to have it. And Josh, do you want to jump in now? Oh, did we lose him?
Actually, I'll wait. I'll just remember what I need to say. I'll just wait and let you guys finish.
I'd like to add something if I
Yeah,
could.
please.
So I think, and I did briefly speak to Rachel about this, I think my concern going in with the email and everything else is that we do follow. It's important to follow the statute regarding the compensation committee that is different than employees. And I'll just say it, there's been a lot of trust issues with the last compensation studies that have been done in the past 2 years. I found errors that were not correct. I think there's, I know that I am concerned that HR or commissioners have any input really into that wage study. I think, I'm glad that it's true, but I think it should be a third party outside vendor. I think electeds, if they want to participate with that style of see, I also think part of this could be, And like you said, any way we wanted to, and I don't know what it is, I was gonna ask all the elected what they thought would be a process that they would like, whether it's give the information to Troop, whether it's select the committee, the compensation committee, and have them interview each elected individually to get that information. I do think it'll benefit some electeds that are doing much more than what the ORS would describe for them. So I just wanna make sure that from my point of view, it's gotta be clean. It should be a clean process where the intent of the ORS and what that means, cause if you read it, the bottom line is, it doesn't say HR will provide with you with the compensation study. It doesn't spell out how the compensation studies, if there is any done. So that's an interpretation that this board has done in the last 20 years or 30, I don't know how long. And along the way, sometimes it's polluted and sometimes it's not trusted. And I think that, at least for me, and I can't speak for Josh, but for me, it is, it's important that electeds are treated differently and that we're not treated, not held to a higher standard, but we have an ORS that directs it. And I just wanna make sure, and I would ask all of them, like, how do you think the process should work? As an incoming commissioner, I don't wanna decide for the other electeds what the process looks like. I just wanna make sure we're guided by the ORS. Anyways, I just wanna make sure that I made that clear.
Yeah, and I would add, there are job, I have seen this, I don't have any, but I just remember in my time here, I have seen job descriptions for elected positions from time to time, so it didn't seem unheard of. This didn't seem unprecedented to ask for, so I'm just adding that to the mix.
Paul, in your memo, which I started to answer and then thought better of it for the time being.
Yeah.
Do you think electeds are employees or something, a different type of creature?
But they're definitely different type of creatures, especially during elections. And
Okay, we have different abilities to do different things. For example, I can walk around all day long, 24/7 and promote an election, like the radio bond. But don't you think that the people, all of us here at this table are employees in terms of being subject to fair labor standards and, lawsuits and blah, blah, blah?
I believe to a point, but the statutes specifically say that for certain things, we are not considered employees.
Right.
So there are definitive statutes that address saying that we are not, that electeds are, that you are not an employee. Are you an employee in that you get a retirement and then you get a paycheck and all, and then you have to adhere to all these things? Yes, but bottom line is, there's nothing that HR can do to you. The people would have to recall you, so
It'd be
there's,
very hard to fire all of us in this room except for her.
it's gonna be very hard to fire, exactly.
I
Debbie,
understand.
She's the least
Yeah.
likely.
Yeah.
No one's gonna fire Debbie.
But you know what I'm saying is, if one of us got accused of one thing or another, stealing or sexual harassment or anything else, we'd be treated like any other employee, I think.
Well, no, there would be different processes for that, and maybe Josh can speak to that, it would be a different, because of the elected part, I think the Attorney General would get involved. There'd be a different process, because HR doesn't oversee electeds.
Well, they do in certain respect. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's hear from
Well,
council.
Do we not have that
Yeah, I don't
particular
think-
Yeah,
conversation
exactly.
today? Because the one that I would respectfully ask is that we have Troop currently contracted and Troop currently working on this project. And if we need to pause this project and tell everybody that we're not doing it, we need to make that decision. And so I think this conversation, and the electeds piece of that conversation can be sliced off and handled at a later time. It doesn't have to happen this week, but I'm putting on my HR hat, not my commissioner hat as I speak to you today. I'm just trying to get the classification for all of our employees reviewed as we promised them that we would. And if we feel like the entire process is undermined, to your point, Paul, I don't want us to go forward and not trust that Troop is doing the right process for all of our employees. So can we separate out?
I think it already was, in my mind, it was separated, this was
Okay.
about.
This is only about electeds.
electeds, and
Thank
to your
you.
point, I don't
Thank you. I
think
just wanted to
electeds are
clarify that.
above employees in any way. They are just handled differently, so I would say it's more complex than just a simple answer.
Okay,
But I
thank
think-
you. I
can't
wasn't
speak
hearing
from
that. I wanted to be
But
sure.
my understanding was this was purely about how we were gonna go forward with electeds.
Sure. Yeah, and I appreciated the statute that Denise shared with us because it's exactly what the information that the compensation committee should be looking at. And so I think the question is, to Paul's point, is that something that we as the county provide to our volunteers? And if so, who and how? Or are we just electing volunteers and giving them the statute, right? And suggesting that they do the work. So I think and that's two ends of a very broad spectrum. I'm not saying it has to be either of those. But I think that's a very valid piece of this conversation that we need to frame up is, our consultant said this is their recommendation. It's a recommendation. It's clearly been that's not, people are comfortable with their recommendation. Great. Let's, to Rachel's point, with this as the guide, the statute as the guide relating specifically to compensation committee. And I did also ask Rachel if there were other counties that had already created processes around this that we might be able to learn from, since we're clearly starting at ground zero for this county, in trying to create something new. So I don't know
Yeah,
if you had
so-
any responses.
Yeah, there are some, I think, given this discussion and just in the vein of things that we're trying to, processes we're trying to clarify with authorities and how things get done, there's certainly a past practice of how the compensation board functions. They get a recommendation from HR right before the budget, one of the budget committees in spring. Obviously, the statute's guided, but it's very open to interpretation on what we want to do. So some counties just follow that. Other counties have in their charter some bylaws for the compensation board. So it's something that I think would be good to look at. So it's very clear what they will receive when and what they're working on. So I think that's outside of this just due to time constraints, but something to think about that we might want to include going forward. So we're not having this discussion every year as there's changeover, not every year, every 4 years as there's turnover.
May I clarify something first? The compensation study that was done in May of 24 that we were sent, is that not relevant anymore? Is Troop doing a brand new one?
They're doing a brand new one. So
Okay.
that was the purpose. So what we heard back from the compensation study were many of the things that Paul just said.
Right.
We're not comfortable with this. We don't feel, and we heard it from employees at different levels of the organization that said, I don't think you have my classification correct. I don't think I'm being compared to the right people in other counties. I think this is wrong. And it was like, okay, so we gotta dig into this and figure out how we make sure everybody actually their job description fairly represents what they do, and that those job descriptions then are in job families that make sense. You know, there's some we've stopped ever hiring a one because financially nobody would work for that, right? And so we made adjustments, but instead of looking at the structure of that, we just kind of worked within it as best we could. So the goal is that every employee will have the opportunity with their job description in this hand and a survey on their computer screen, either say, this is correct, this is what I do, or this is not what I do, here's what I really do. And then Troop will take that work and say, okay, let's look at the job descriptions and here's what these should be. And this is how they should relate to each other. And then they'll bring that back to us and say, this is our recommendation for how your job classifications could and should work. And then we go forward from that place, right? So that's the process that is the job classification study for employees. So it won't look at what was done in 23 or 24,
Okay.
because they will then take those new classifications as they have been created based on hearing from employees, which will also be vetted through management, right? To make sure that what employees are reflecting is what management intends them to be doing, right? Because then we'll identify some of those potentially as well. And then they will take that to marketing, which will be a brand new marketing based on hopefully the right connections, because Troop will be the one that amended and created the new job description. They'll understand what's in it. They'll go to the other comparators and pull job descriptions that match that one. And ideally, we'll actually have what people really do compared to what people, the same, people do in other counties, that's the right
I
match.
think
So-
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to finish. So what I would like to say is that is exactly as I want to have a conversation with somebody. I want to have a face-to-face or Zoom to Zoom with a third party and be able to say, county assessors are county assessors, but you're comparing me to assessors who aren't overseeing tax collection. And that's a big deal because prior studies, out of 13 counties, only 5 were tax collectors. Additionally, I think an issue that comes up is where county assessor, what do we deal with? We deal with how many accounts do we have? What are we levying, right? But previously we're compared to population. That might work for another department head, but for me, you're comparing me to somebody who you're saying you're comparable to this person. I have 30,000 accounts, they have 10,000 and 8 employees. So that's a conversation I need to have, and if a job description for me, I mean, I'm not against it because I love to educate people on what I do, because a lot of people don't know what the assessor does. But I feel like it's gonna be 20 pages, which is fine if they want 20 pages, right? Because we oversee how many different positions. So for me, I'm really fine to do a job description and go through True because I think it's transparent. But I wanna have that conversation with somebody about true comparator counties are different for different elected officials. And additionally, how does that work in the structure of the county? Because when you have elected officials who are making less than department managers, that's a huge issue. So while you may have comparator counties, well, different things have happened over the course of the years. So I don't know if their pay is 100% accurate. How does it look within our county structure? And I hear you say that's part of it too. So for me, I'm happy to go through a third party and go through True, if I'm able to have those conversations.
Yeah, and that was the intention of the interviews, so.
That
Yeah.
felt really good to say. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Why didn't you say it a while ago?
Well, I just got my foot in the door.
I just wanna piggyback on that, cause I think it's the same thing, if we look at those comparator counties, it's the same thing, you know, you're looking at counties that have 6,000 registered voters, you know, we have 22,000, and so you're just looking at the volume, and then those people have directors of elections and a director of recordings, they're not that department head, they're not, you know, the clerk is the person that is the recording supervisor and manager. And yeah, I have my chief, and she is the supervisor of the staff, but it's like I'm overseeing all of that, I don't have somebody that does one thing and another, and I think that's important, and when you look at those comparator counties, it's not comparable at all, which I tried to bring up before, but.
So the one thing that is going forward is that the comparable counties are not changing, correct?
that is currently, we have an approved
Yeah.
philosophy at the county of, compensation philosophy of the Board of Commissioners approved that named the county. So the trick in changing our counties, even just what occurred when we added the 2 new ones was that we pulled ourselves up, which was good, but it's also, we don't have the revenue of the bigger counties. So there is this catch 22 in comparing ourselves to bigger counties because they have more revenue than we do. So it's the conversation that Doug has been leading us in around, here's the revenue we have, here's to all the work that's being done, here's all the revenue that we hope we can generate. If we start comparing ourselves to counties that are outside of that, we put ourselves in a scary arena of going places where they have more revenue. There is also, if I understand correctly, and Josh might know this, from a law enforcement perspective, I think there is some statutory requirement about their comparators. I've heard that, I don't know if it's true, maybe Josh knows.
Josh, I just wanna follow up on Chrissy's point,
one second.
where I was going with that is, it was my understanding that the comparable counties weren't changing. But if you're finding in your particular that they're not, the adjustment would be made
And I think
to
for,
compensate for that.
Yeah, and I
That's
think
part
for-
of this
yeah.
It's kind of
adjustment.
that
And I
step
brought
back
it
That's an art.
yeah, and I brought it up to Doug before too, it's like when you look at the clerk's office, and so for example, we'll have office specialists too, and I know we're not talking about those, but just as an example, cause it's very clear. No other, and any of those comparative counties, none of those counties in the clerk's office have office specialist twos. They have recording deputies and they have election deputies, or they have deputy clerks, and that's what they are, they're not OS twos, and so you can't say that OS twos in Jackson County, they may have office specialist twos, but they don't function that way in the clerk's office. And I was trying to make that clear, it's been years, but you know that there's a differentiation there.
Yeah,
And so trying to navigate that's been very challenging, but
And it's challenging because when you see one county, and the chances of finding any county that is like this is a complete match, because even with commissioners, there is no complete match.
But I think it would give you a range,
Yeah.
when you add those the columns into the spreadsheet. And you go, okay, Morrow County is a comparator county, but we're doing triple in that in revenue and they have double the employees. I think they'd be above it, so.
Well, and I think that's for commissioners to look at the compensation velocity. Would you agree, Commissioner Bell, that those are set and they were set in the philosophy and it's, although there's two ways to look at it. Because the statute calls for individually, which I had never seen the statute, so again, I appreciate Denise, individually looking at electeds and their pieces, right?
And also, it does not talk about revenue at all, and the ORS does not
No,
consider.
that's, yeah, that's a practicality we're stuck with.
I'm just saying, the thing is that that's part of the problem with the past wage study was that, and Josh could probably speak to it better, is the things were changed from going from hourly to annual salaries, the way you look at compensation and benefits. Like, I'm hoping Troop, my other question was, is Troop being influenced by this board on what parameters to look at, or are they doing it from their own professional standpoint? That's the third party, rather than us asking a survey. She would like to speak to Troop about her particular situation, and you're right, the statute says that it should be for each elector, so if she wants to be, if she thinks she should be compared with this, Josh thinks he should, we should all be compared with different counties because of these reasons. That's required by law, so it's not a choice or a philosophy, it's actually how we have to do it if we're gonna follow the law.
Correct, and I think, and I don't disagree with that at all. This, again, first time I've seen the statute, so this is
Poor
great.
Josh has been
I
so
know, he's been
patient.
so patient. I think, and then we look at, so for our employees, which then are we doing, how far, calls out specifically electeds, and then I think the question and the concern for our process and for the process that we're starting right now is, are department heads going to expect the same? Are employees going to expect the same? That now we're going to open up our comparator counties and for all positions, or are we simply doing it per the statute for the electeds? So I think that's where the question
That's
gets
a choice of
bigger.
philosophy.
Well, and maybe that's precisely it, because the other positions aren't defined in statute. So maybe that's precisely it, that these positions are defined in statute. So Josh,
So maybe I should have took my turn in the beginning because I think that but Denise pointed out a broad spectrum of ORS that every, like, we got to follow this. The one I'm going to point out specifically, and I don't know if everybody's read it, but I strongly encourage you to, is 204.112. That specifies the county compensation board.
Yeah.
The county compensation board is appointed by the county governing body, but then they're on their own. They're given parameters per this ORS on what they're supposed to do. The county commissioners, the governing body, is not supposed to dictate to them the process. They can help them along the process, but the other thing that you guys are talking about is a lot of county comparison, like you're pulling in comparison by county. The ORS says that they're supposed to review the compensation paid to persons comparably employed by the state, local bodies, or private businesses, and it's supposed to be deemed appropriate by the board, by the compensation board, not counties as comparators, but paid to persons individually. So to Cassandra's point, if she is the assessor and the tax collector, the comparable is not a county, it's another person who is a tax collector and assessor. It's not necessarily within this parameter of counties. At least that's not how I'm determining it. The other factor is that every bit of this conversation when it comes to wages is only talking about wage at a comparable standard. This ORS, again, defines other parameters that have to be considered by the compensation board, not by the governing body or this group here, but by the compensation board. By law, they have to take into effect the number of employees that are supervised, the size of the budget, duties and responsibilities, and compensation paid to subordinates or other appointed employees that serve in positions of comparable management. All of those factors per law are supposed to be what factors into the elected's compensation. a lot of the conversation we're having here, you know, Aaron, you had mentioned in your recent email about being defensible. But if we're having this conversation and then we're going to the compensation board and saying, this is how you're going to do it, you know, is that defensible under this law when the compensation board is the one that is supposed to dictate how they're going to make these comparisons? You know, you have an interview with Troop, let's say, and you were able to give your job description. You know, the compensation board can still come and interview you, and they can compare you to whatever persons that they want to, that they deem appropriate per the ORS. So I think that dictating that we have to stay within county compensation or comparable other counties, I think, is not necessarily what the ORS is saying. I think it's talking about persons, and we have to consider all these other factors, not just this comparative to these counties. You know, Christy was talking about county clerk and recording. You know, and so she needs to be compared to somebody that is more appropriately following in what she does. A sheriff's a sheriff, so you know, they're pretty much going to have the same duties, and I would probably agree that a sheriff has a tremendous amount of statutory requirements that more so than maybe other positions. So it might be a little bit more definitive for a sheriff, but the ORS has to dictate and guide what it is that we do. And I think from a defensible standpoint, I don't think that if we sit here and we decide that we're going to tell the compensation committee, this is how you're going to do it because this is the work we did, that's not as defensible as saying, here's the ORS, here's what you need. We recommend third party, you know, here's problems we've had in the past. What do you want from us to be able to help you do this? I think that's the appropriate thing. Also, I did double check. I sent out an email to the sheriff's group, and I haven't had a single sheriff return an email back to me saying they have a job description. So in the state of Oregon, the majority of the sheriffs, at least the ones that have returned an email back to me just today, none of them have job descriptions. So for whatever that's worth in considering whether or not we want job descriptions, and to Paul's point, there and Doug's point for that matter, you know, yeah, we get paid by the county. We have to follow certain laws, but we are different. The fact that there's a whole entire ORS that specifies how it is that we're supposed to determine our pay tells us that we're different from employees, in my opinion. So I wouldn't stop the whole compensate or the classification and comp study through Troop simply based on whether or not the electeds choose to go this route. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I just want to add one thing that's in the ORS that we never talk about is by statute, they can't be compared to private businesses. So it's something different than what we've been looking at, counties. It's actually different for electeds and they can be looking at private businesses. So I just want to make sure that really read that.
We can too.
Right.
We can look at firms.
That's what I'm saying. And I
I was
think,
not aware of this statute.
I don't know the last time that anybody at the county, obviously Denise knew, but certainly I've never seen it in my 4 years.
Yeah.
And I was on the compensation committee for 2 years before I became a commissioner. And I was just, they gave us the recommendation and the information and we've done it. So it's a past practice of the county, but you're completely correct. And I don't know the last time that past practice was ever checked against the statute. So we're in a new world.
it's a new world,
It's
and
a
I
new
think to
world.
the point of, don't stop the Troop thing for the employee, do that.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm,
I
make
think
sure I
do
was
that, but
hearing
the
correctly.
other question is, should we be following that for everybody? That's something that we should be discussing as part of the philosophy of how we do things. Because let's be honest, it's the comparators, as a union representative, I can tell you the comparators that you asked about, there are some statutory for bargaining that have to be compared. But
Right.
they are antiquated, and the reason why we have to deviate is they make no sense, because again, I can buy a house in Washington County for a lot less than I can buy a house for in Tillamook County. My gas is 40 cents more a gallon here. Food, we all know these real things, but we never compare them, so we're always compared to this. And our revenue, that's why we're trying to raise the revenue, because the reality is we can't live as if we're still a small rural county where everything's cheap.
Yeah.
I paid $80,000 for my house in 2001, it's worth a little bit more than that now, so.
Well, go ahead.
Let's see, so I chaired that compensation committee for a long time, as part of the budget committee, probably close to 20 years. And the system Some of us argued other ways, and I was one of them, that certain positions, like a sheriff's a sheriff's a sheriff, but certain other positions, maybe you should have a broader scope and all, but we ended up over the years saying, the HR people gave us these comparators, and I had no real issue with Jackson County and Lincoln and Clatsop and all the others, at Baker County, for example, that had some comparables. And then it kind of evolved into some other things to look at as well, including the cost of living and housing and some other things that may have influenced or do influence it. But we never really got to what I thought might have been a better representation. But the flip side of that is, where do you stop and how far do you go, and do you bring in, does somebody say, well, they pay somebody over at Intel this amount for this kind of work, and is that really work either? So the fact that we ended up with like to like to like, I don't think is necessarily bad. Now, what Cassandra said is maybe there needs to be a slightly deeper dive to where you've got one person does this, another one does half again as much, and you really should not compare them, because your assessor and a tax collector has a little higher level of responsibility than an assessor. And I don't know that we've ever dug that deeply into this stuff. I can tell you the budget committee, for the most part, would look at it, ask a few questions, and then go to lunch, or you know what I mean? We say, okay, we'll call it good and pass it forward. And it worked. And, our comparators are, if you're working in a public safety or public service environment, there's a good chance you'll stay there. You might move to another agency, but people don't necessarily go in and out of private business. Some do, some don't. But so that's kind of the history, how we stayed where we are. It was basically 80-90% prepared by HR. Then the committee looked at it and said, well, what about this? Or did you think that? Or this county, you can buy a house in Baker County for a whole lot less than you can here, and it evolved. But I don't know that it's all bad. So that's just kind of a 30,000-foot perspective. I don't think it was bad. Could it be improved? Probably could. And should it be improved? Don't know.
So we did add Lincoln and Clatsop, and we added Josephine, and there's one more that we added. Do you remember what that was, Mary Faith? We added
Jackson, maybe?
Jackson
Yeah.
and Josephine, and those were specific, this is for all employees, so this isn't specific to the commissioners or to the electeds, and I'm not suggesting it solves the electeds problem. But just for all employees, we added those because they had higher cost of living and higher housing costs specifically to try to balance out what our employees were struggling with. So there was that adjustment in employees that continues to go forward. And there is the deeper dive that's needed for some employees, just as there is for those of us sitting around the table. I think the other piece I will just put on the table that we all get to be thoughtful about as elected officials, because we can all be recalled by our voters, is that we're sitting now having this conversation at a time when we're struggling to know if we can balance our budget. And we will be going into bargaining with AFSCME starting next year under the context of working to balance our budget, and of course Teamsters the year after that. And all of us as elected officials sitting here today talking about how much we should make, and that conversation will come in front of first the compensation committee and then the budget committee, which us as commissioners, at a time when we're in a budget conversation that is not looking good. This is a difficult time, I think, for the public perhaps to understand the concerns that we all have. I'm not suggesting not to do it, but I am just suggesting that we want to be thoughtful. I don't know if you all remember the few years ago when commissioners gave themselves a raise after not giving themselves a raise for many years, the public outcry as well as the employee outcry related to it. So I think we want to be thoughtful in both our process and in our decision making about how that fits into the current context that we're in. And maybe I just say that because I'm going to be the one that has to vote yes or no and take the heat on it. But it's just a thoughtful piece of the process that maybe we won't do this in a 1-year leap. Maybe we won't, you know what I mean? And so I looked to other officials to be thoughtful and to provide input and suggestions as well, that are cognizant of the public world that we're all gonna be sitting in this conversation.
I think the important thing is, what I'm talking about here is the process is doing it legally. I didn't say how much we should make. I don't know what that money is. Maybe it's less than what we make currently right now. Maybe I should get a pay cut. But I want the process to be transparent. And I want the process to be fair. And I want it to follow, as a police officer, I want it to follow the law. That's what I want. We've done it differently, and it's not about saying we deserve all this money. It's about doing the process correctly and fairly. That's, for me, that's what this is about.
I agree, and I really appreciate this conversation, so I just wanna thank everybody because I think it's helpful to have conversations, even if they're difficult, even the conversations we haven't had before. So I appreciate that because we have rolled forward doing things in the same way for a while. And we've ended up with the complaints that you described earlier. So I'm grateful to the compensation committee for their work and I recall from having tracked budget committee meetings year after year, that very often you guys would make recommendations that the commissioners completely ignored anyway.
Well, that was the time when we offered or recommended a 5% increase, and they turned it down. And that was another major step towards the compression we have and
Yes.
other issues, and so then you say, well, okay, we turned it in, let's go home. I mean, it was ultimately their
Right.
decision.
Right.
And I remember Commissioner Bardline said he encountered somebody in the parking lot or in the community who said, if you had taken that raise, we'd have had you recalled by the end of the month.
And it was also, I recall, an all or nothing. It wasn't, we're gonna adjust and make 1% over here or dicker with this amount over here. It was just kind of an all or nothing.
Oh.
Generally speaking.
Okay, all right.
So there just wasn't a lot, like you said, there wasn't a lot of deep dive into what the data actually says.
Yeah.
So the compensation though, board has this, they don't have the final say, they're supposed to have
No. They make the recommendation
the
to the,
recommendation, the board has the final.
yes.
And I agree with Paula, I'm not sitting here saying, I'm supposed to make this, I'm supposed to make this. I'm saying that if, you brought this up with True, like, is this how we wanna do it? And that's why we're having this
Yeah,
conversation.
no, it's a great
because
conversation.
I'm
I
gonna
agree.
advocate for my employees, to get what they deserve for the entire courthouse and everybody to get equal pay. So that's where I was at, is that, are these comparable people that are dictating what our pay should be? But it sounds like there's a lot of statutes I didn't know we had.
I don't know that any of us except Denise, well, again, I've said thank you
Josh,
Denise 3 times. I mean, I've been here for
We knew.
4 years and been again on the compensation committee for 2 years before that. This was never brought forward, so.
Is this something that county council needs to review and then they?
Yeah, I
the
would
board
I
make
would
sure
argue
that
the
they're-
county council, if we're having a philosophy, if
Yeah.
it pertains to electeds, it should.
Absolutely.
And again, having a discussion, if this is a way that is the cleanest way, then maybe we can adapt or adopt something similar for, again,
So
Yeah,
what do
and
other
maybe-
counties do? I mean, I've
they
always,
follow the law. If you, I checked today, Lane County, a lot of home rule counties have it in their charter,
yeah.
almost verbatim, they basically copy and paste the statute.
Yeah.
But if you look at any constitutional counties, they have to follow this, and they all have it on their website. We don't, but they do.
So we're not reinventing
list
the
it.
wheel, we just copy what they're doing.
Which I think we're just finally realizing that we probably need to do it like this. They name their, and I would argue also, just for food for thought, and this was a quick discussion with Cassandra about it, is maybe it's not the same people as the budget committee, and one of the things with that is because the budget, this is supposed to be a fact finding, like, this,
Yeah.
to make a recommendation. The budget committee is hearing all the horrible crap and all the bad news. And if they hear that first, then of course that's gonna influence this decision. We can always turn down the 5% raise, we can always say it's not the right time, like they did, whether that's good or bad. The point of this is to get an actual unbiased number that then we decide how we move forward. Do we have the budget to pay that? No, we don't do it. But it shouldn't be polluted because the budget committee is concerned, or the compensation committee is concerned about something that the ORS doesn't tell them to consider. It just doesn't tell them to consider the revenue of the county that you're in, it's all these other factors, so again, it's keeping it fair and balanced, and then we make the hard decision of no,
Whether we
yes.
can or can't
Yeah.
afford it, even though it's the right thing to do.
Sure,
Yeah.
Can I ask Sean a question? So Sean, I'm trying to find it, are you still on, Sean? Yeah. Is it in the statute?
Yeah.
Is it in statute that the compensation board is the relay? It's not? Okay, thank you.
Cause we recruited
No,
for
it's
it
not.
twice and got nobody.
Okay.
And so then we requested the budget committee members if they would please serve as the compensation committee, which had been history. But we tried to tease it apart last time and recruited for it, I think, 2 different rounds with no success.
So we could have different members.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry,
So-
Sean, I didn't mean to step on you.
I could see how.
Oh, it's okay. I'm used to it. So I think it's Marion County actually has a separate compensation board, and they have actually gone out into the community and looked at, asked HR directors, say like at the Creamery, Warner's, you know, someplace outside of the compensation, the budget committee members to do their compensation board.
Ooh, that's a good idea, getting
Yeah, those-
HR
if you-
professionals, then
If
they
you look
would
at
know
Lane
how to
County,
get
they
it.
have an amazing, their compensation committee is professionals in other businesses and stuff, so.
Yeah.
See, there's one measure on the ballot today about that, not for counties, but for a lot of statewide positions to have an independent, unaffiliated group set salaries. And so if that passes, then there's probably some momentum to do this. So maybe this does need to be revisited.
It's a good idea, it's a good point. Well, I appreciate that that it seems to me like we're all on the same page in terms of wanting to improve our process, wanting more information, wanting to be accurate about what people should be making, or at least what their accurate comparators are making. I have heard for years about the discrepancies in our current system. For example, the sheriff, the sheriff of a county of 27,000, however, it's actually a county of 100,000 for 6 months of the year. The justice of the peace, who is maybe, I don't know if Ryan's on right now, he may be the only justice of the peace in the entire state who's actually an attorney. Because in some places, justices of the peace are not professional attorneys, and et cetera. So assessment and taxation, to your point, so I think we have a lot of combined positions. We have a lot of positions that just aren't, they're not cookie cutter, and they don't compare well to the normal comparators. So I support us finding a new process that's more accurate, that brings us more information, and maybe it is an entirely different group. I heard our compensation committee, our citizen budget committee, saying when the recommendation came forward for the 3% COLA, I heard them very clearly saying, we want more information about the elected position. So they realized that there's some, they needed more information about the elected position. So whether we move forward with them or try to recruit another compensation committee is fine. I think maybe Troop is the appropriate body to do the information gathering, unless we expect a new compensation committee to do all that information gathering. That seems like a lot to ask. So maybe we don't call it job descriptions, because that makes some people uncomfortable. Maybe we call it fact finding about electeds, and have Troop do it and have conversations with us like the one that Cassandra asked.
Yeah, using this as their
Yes.
guidepost.
Yes.
Ryan put his hand up and he quickly took it down, so he woke the beast, but he.
Where'd you go? Where'd you go, Judge Cannell?
I was just letting you guys know that I am here.
Okay.
And
Was I correct in saying you're the only justice of the peace in the state who's an attorney? Or am I?
No, so I was looking at the numbers we sent out from the comparison that we've done. And then I went and pulled the salaries for the other attorney, where my position's unusual, because whether or not the justice of the peace has to be a member of the bar is determined by the county commissioners. And we added that requirement in, I think, 2012. But don't quote me on that. It is a requirement here. The comparison study that we've done with justices of the peace, and I'm pretty much close to the middle, a little bit on the higher end of middle for salary at just over 90,000. All those are non-attorney justices of the peace. I know them all and can go over what they did before becoming a JP. When looking at the justices of the peace that do have the attorney requirement, their salaries range from about 126,000 to just under 140,000.
Thank you. Excellent example. Yeah, and speaking as a commissioner who is one of the 3 votes ultimately on this, I have been consistently uncomfortable with voting for salary adjustments for other electeds because I didn't feel like we had all the information. For example, Denise has spoken to me previously about that she didn't think the market study for her position was accurate, and not only Denise, I'm not just calling out Denise, a number of people have talked to me about that, and yet we're in the position to vote not only on our own salaries, but on other people's salaries, feeling like we don't have all the right information. So let's get the right information.
And so the next time this would come up would be compensation committee, which would be with the budget committee for electeds. So what's our timeline?
We don't have to wait though.
No, I was saying, what's our timeline for getting a process created and implemented? What's our end date so that we don't miss the budget cycle?
Yes, and I'm saying we don't have to wait for the budget cycle if we don't want to.
No, Denise has her hand up.
Denise? Denise? If you're talking, you're muted. Uh-oh, we can't hear you.
There we go. That took a while. I was just on a Zoom meeting with the assessor, so that's a different format. Good discussion, and I appreciate the conversations I've had with you, Mary Faith and Doug and Aaron. But we're never going to know everything about what we do. And like Ryan just said, you know, he knows all the people that do his job. And I know all the people that do the job in the 36 counties that do what I do. And the discussion about, you know, population, we may have 27,000, but half the people at least that own property don't live here. So, but we still have to go value their property and, you know, do the customer service and send the tax statements. And so and I think, you know, I think I felt in the past that I didn't have the opportunity to weigh in on what counties were used this last round. And I know in the past, you know, when Mona did it, she would do a pretty deep study of what the, you know, the comparable counties around us and what they do and what the compensation was, and gave it to the compensation committee. Other years, I know AOC has done them because, you know, there's only, you know, 9 of us that are elected, and it's not like we're looking at 300 employees and what they make. So we're never going to get all the information. I know I don't, you know, I'm elected. I chose it. I knew what the pay was when I got the job. But I also know that, you know, I don't get the benefits as a department head that that the department heads get, like vacation and sick. You know, we don't get that as elected officials. I know it's tough, and it always is hard when it comes down to what about me? What about my employees? You know, electeds are different. And what I was going to say, because I lost my train of thought, is that, you know, I'm sure I don't do this job like the prior assessor did. And I'm sure Cassandra's going to do this job much better than I have done it. So it's, you know, that's what we are as an elected official. We know what we're getting into. We know what the statute says, and we do our jobs to the best of our abilities. And, you know, we don't have to run again in 4 years if we don't like it, or we can, you know, or we might not get elected in 4 years if we don't do it the right way. So just a lot of moving parts. And I thank you, Cassandra, I think, and Chrissy, you did great explaining the points, and Josh, there's just a lot to it.
And no,
So,
You're a commissioner now. The love is gone.
sorry.
but thank you all, and it's a good conversation. And I think where I have been felt bad in the past is when I didn't feel like I had the input. That like Cassandra said, Baker County is not comparable. We have 30,000 accounts; they have 10. Jackson County is not comparable. They have 200,000 accounts. We have 30,000. Which and same with roads and sheriff. I mean, I think we should have the leeway to look at what these people do. And I think the people you could ask is the people that do the job, because they know their county counterparts. Okay. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you,
Denise.
Hey, Josh, do you have your hand up again? This is number 2.
I think I was catching a little bit of conversation. I apologize, I'm multitasking, but you were talking about when you were going to convene or possibly convening the compensation board. Is that correct? Maybe not waiting till budget time or something?
I was just saying, we don't have to wait until budget.
Yep.
Until the budget.
Well,
because we didn't have a market study for the electeds in this last budget cycle. We didn't have that. We had the COLA, but we didn't have the market.
Right. Well, I not to be the stickler here, but I do like the law, and that 204, I think it was 112 that I pointed out to you guys. The very last line item says that the sheriff can't make less than anybody within his office, and in April, Under Sheriff Kelly will make more than me, about 3.9% more than me. So you may have to convene it beforehand, anyways.
You are encouraged to be a stickler about the law.
Yeah, if you're not.
I mean, in my profession, it is a good thing in my defense, but also it comes across differently, I guess, to certain people. But, it is a factor, and it's just something that people need to have on their radar, that by law, that's what it says.
Thank you. Sean?
You bet.
So there's nothing that says the compensation board can't be called at any time. It doesn't have to be during budget season. It just needs to be noticed.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think my point was that we have a process to work through to figure out if it's gonna be this compensation committee and what if we're just gonna give them this piece of paper and say go, or what we wanna do for process. I was looking, not that we would wait, I was looking at, we do have an endpoint by which we have to get that work done, only knowing that there's a lot of work on the table, a lot of stuff that's happening, and I think Rachel as our chief administrative officer is probably where we're going to put this, hey, we need to redesign the compensation committee, right? And if that's true, then we need to make sure we're looking at it at timeline realistically and reasonably. So that was my only reason for asking, and I do apologize, I think Frank is probably sitting upstairs waiting for me. So I just hated to walk out on the conversation because it's a really good one. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so do we have consensus that we would like to work with Troop? We're not gonna call it job descriptions, we're going to call it fact finding, work with Troop to identify, maybe, well, not only are we gonna tell them what we do in these positions, but also what we think the comparators should be. Like you, for example, maybe you think the comparator should be other counties with about 30,000 files, contracts, what are you calling them?
Tax accounts.
Thank you. Accounts. So 30,000, whatever those are. And I don't know what everybody's things are, but maybe it's reasonable for us to be able to tell them this is who would actually be doing something comparable.
Well, doesn't county council reviewing the statutes need to make sure that Troop is reviewing?
I mean, that would be a good conversation with Troop,
Yeah.
saying that, however,
Yeah.
as long as they're following the statute, for the electeds at least.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what we've asked them.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
affirming they're aware of it and
Sure.
what's their process for other counties and reporting back on that.
Do we have consensus? It's okay if we don't, but do we have consensus that we're willing to have conversations with Troop?
I think you should.
Josh, Ryan,
I don't know why you always have to call on me to be the pain here, but I'm not sure that I'm I mean, Mary Faith, and you know, I understand, but you just had a whole conversation about, you know, what it is that we are going to decide are the comparables, where the ORS says that the compensation board decides what the comparables are. The compensation board, I think, needs to be convened, whether it's a new group of people, they need to be advised of this conversation and say, how do you guys want to move forward? We can use Troop. You guys can interview them yourselves. We recognize that the way the law is described, we don't look at comparable counties, we look at comparable persons in those positions. It's supposed to be up to them per the law, not up to us. We are not supposed to decide and dictate to the compensation board how they're going to view these comparables and what those comparables are. They're supposed to decide. So that, I mean, my consensus is get the compensation board in here and say, we need to do this right and we need to do it by law. How do you guys want to move forward? That's my thought process. I think Troop needs to continue with the classification and stuff for the other job things, but Paul, are you making fun of me because I'm doing this a lot with my hands?
No.
Okay. Anyways, that's my thought. I don't think that it's the board's decision. I don't think it's the elected officials' decision to decide what the comparables are and how the compensation board is going to view them. The law says it's how they deem appropriate, the compensation board.
Yep.
That's my thought.
I hear you, and I appreciate that, and I wasn't suggesting that we dictate anything to them, just rather that we gather information for them. But I think I hear you saying that you would prefer that we not even have Troop gather information for them, that we ask them how they want to gather information themselves. Is that what you're saying?
Well, not even necessarily themselves. I think that they're the ones that need to come in and say, well, yeah, I think it's appropriate that Troop compares. Please give them these parameters, not necessarily go with the counties. You know, the county should offer to pay for it. And it should be them saying, hey, you know, or we can say, hey, here are your options. You can interview everybody and get your own feel for it. You can do your own study if you want. You can have us pay for Troop to do it for you. How do you want us to move forward? The point is the ORS says is that they're the ones to decide. I think that they need to come in, they need to be given the whole entire picture, and then they need to be the ones to say, this is what we deem appropriate. Again, that's what the ORS says.
And
So,
do you have a bias or an opinion one way or the other about whether we move forward with the current compensation committee, which is the citizen members of our budget committee? They are the appointed compensation committee.
they are the appointed compensation committee. For ease, yeah, they would be the ones that you would bring in and ask to do it. To Paul's point, they are deep in the middle of all of the ups and downs that go with the budget hearing, and that absolutely could influence them. If they actually are given the law, because I think I heard Erin talking about how she was on the compensation committee and, you know, for years and had never seen that law or read it. Maybe they've never read it. I think they're all professional enough to be able to set everything aside. On the flip side of that, it could be great to have a completely separate compensation committee, but do you put out for it and elicit it, or do you go to these big agencies or big companies like Sean mentioned and try to convince their HR people to come in? There's pluses to both. One is quick, one is more efficient, and maybe a little bit more defensible as that word comes up. I mean, in a perfect world and a clean, defensible, ethical situation, you're pulling 3 brand new people in that are not part of the budget committee.
At this point, the consensus, I think everybody says move forward with Troop for the employees because that's not affected by the ORS.
Right.
We don't have to make the decision on this part now, right? Today, are you planning on?
We don't have to. I thought if we had consensus, we could gather that, but apparently we don't.
See, with any committee, it's nice to have professional experts, you know, like Bob DeBoard, you know, we have people that are in the real estate market, appraisers, so, you know, any kind of committee, it would be nice to have people that are in that world.
And we do have a current active appointed compensation committee. So there's that.
And you could also, by law, take the 3 that are on the budget committee and add 2 more that are from private industry, because you can go 3 to 5. You guys can appoint up to 5. So you could just take the 3 you already have and add 2 more just for the compensation board. Or you could elicit all, I I like Cassandra's idea, like somebody maybe that's in real estate would be an expert more leaning toward, so it's like you get that variety of expertise that could be extremely beneficial to being very whole about this. But, you could just add 2 more members because you can go to 5. So that's another option.
Yeah, and we could also poll the current compensation committee and ask them if they wanna continue in that role, because, they might be tired of our meetings.
Well, they're all.
Correct, correct.
They've all been
Yeah.
appointed here recently this year. So in effect, you almost have a new one. They haven't been hanging around for years like I did. And so, if you added 2 more, I think that's not a bad suggestion.
Yeah.
You say, okay, we're gonna take another look at this, maybe come through the side door, and let's make a group of 5 and tell them what they have to do.
And I will also say, and I appreciate you asking my opinion, Mary Faith, but again, why are you laughing, Paul? Oh, my hands. I'm going to shut my camera off. The law states that you guys get to appoint. So my opinion, really, realistically, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you're asking it, but it really doesn't matter. The governing body gets to appoint the 3 to 5 members. It can be brand new. It can be compensation. That is your guys' decision. So, and I, in the same way that I respect the law on how it maps this out, I respect the fact that that is your guys' authority to choose how you want to move that forward. So, anyways, yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I think this whole conversation is about us coming together as a peer group, all of us electeds talking about this together. So we value your opinion. Okay, anything else we want or need to say about this today? This has been an awesome conversation. I am thankful to everybody who's participated. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
thank you.
having us.
You're welcome. Anything else for the good of the
Your
order?
opinion matters too, even
Well,
though.
I wanna clarify where I think we're at.
Yes.
No.
I don't think we're just leaving here and nothing's happening, right?
Correct.
I really like where this is going. I think, I spoke earlier about, some ideas for procedures and bylaws for compensation board. I could see that coming later. We're embarking on a lot of change, so I like the idea of keeping the current compensation board to get through the next budget cycle, and then really pursuing the bylaws, adding, maybe going out for 3 different lay people, including experts who work in HR. We are gonna stay the course with the troop, with the employees, and we're gonna wait to hear back from them on what troop is saying, wait to hear back from troop on what they're saying they do for elected official processes, to be more informed with that, and then come back to you all to probably in a board briefing to report out on what they said. So whatever direction we are giving troop to do for electeds, that everybody's in consensus about that.
Yeah.
With the comparables and all of that stuff, just make sure they're under, so we know what troop is looking at.
Yeah, they're
We'll
not
find
doing
that out.
anything with electeds now, but yet, is that what you?
Exactly,
Mhm.
I'm waiting for them to report back on what they do for electeds,
Mhm.
and then we'll share
Okay.
that with you, make sure we're good with that, and then proceed
Okay.
accordingly.
Yes,
Okay.
and I think we had consensus on, let's poll well, maybe we didn't have consensus on this, but I think we should poll the current compensation
Yes.
committee, ask them if they wanna continue in that role as the compensation committee. If they do, I think we should consider adding 2 industry experts.
I love that idea.
So sooner than
You
later.
got
Sooner
the
than
history.
Okay.
I think that's a fantastic idea.
Thank you, wasn't mine, I can take credit.
It was a collaborative.
It was a
So
collaborative
the
idea.
first part of what I said.
We don't wanna give Josh too much credit.
Okay, something else I wanna throw out, again, I'm trying to look at everything as a whole, and I'm not opposed to where we're going at all, I'm just thinking of how this would affect.
Sorry, I was reacting to Paul's comment.
Oh, I didn't see that. We're laughing at Debbie because we didn't know what Debbie was laughing at.
I'm just gonna start throwing my arms around every.
We all could.
Can you pin your see bigger with these hands?
That's the downfall of being a loudmouth, is my hands go a lot too,
Is, so we have comparable counties for all employees who are not elected. And then if we're following the statute as we should to pursue comparable counties that are different, could we, I'm just thinking of worst case scenarios as we get into like where people land on pay tables. I'm just trying to, so help me wrap my hand around if I'm thinking of a potential conflict here is, if we have elected official A who comes out of our comparable counties now that is supposed to make 110,000, and we have a manager under them, same comparables, that makes 100, okay, makes sense. But then we have elected official analysis with different comparable counties, and let's say they end up coming out at 90,000. I don't think that's likely to happen, but there's a lot of data out there and a lot of people. But employee A manager is at 100, and then you have an elected official at 90. So I just want to flag that if we're looking at different comparable counties, it messes with, not messes with, but it has a potential to create inequities.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how to adjust for that, but I just wanted to throw that
I
out there.
feel like that's where we are right now, though.
I don't disagree, but
yeah.
we're on a path to get away from that. And I
Yeah.
don't want to go back.
No.
I don't think that, if I read the statute correctly, I don't think that for electeds, we're even limited to comparable counties.
No, we're not.
Exactly.
For people
Right.
only.
Correct.
So we don't have to use the same comparator counties. We don't even have to use counties.
Agreed.
So I think part of but because it's in statute, like Josh was talking about, that the elected person can't, or that the sheriff in particular, maybe it doesn't say this for the other electeds, but the sheriff cannot make less than people that he's supervising, then maybe that, we build that in, we tell the now, to Josh's point earlier, we're not supposed to tell the compensation committee what we want them to decide. But I think it has to be part of the decision-making factor. It has to be part of the data that if you have a department head, an elected department head, that they're not gonna be making less than people they supervise. That just has to be factored into the data. Because there aren't any hard and fast rules.
I was just gonna say, the comparators now, I don't think there's a fear of that. I think the problem that most of us have is the comparators aren't good. They're beneficial to pay less. So that, I don't think we're gonna have that, and also.
And I hope not. I was just like,
And
could
for
this
bargaining
happen?
purposes, there is statute that tells you what the comparators are, but we can deviate from those. So like, that's what I think. I think part of this change is gonna be, because we're gonna follow the ORS, what if it turns out to be that that's the way we should be doing it for everybody, like it just works? It's not like super high or super low, but I think, I don't think anybody's worried about the current comparators benefiting any employees. Is that fair? I mean.
Am I worried about the, no.
I mean, it's hard to tell, I guess I don't know the answer to that question, but.
We have to define the market you want to compare. You want to do counties only or public agencies?
Right, we're talking about employees
or
now.
much bigger, I'm talking about any of them. We've always looked at counties to counties to counties and then argued about the job duties themselves. But the markets are much bigger than that, but do we even wanna go there? There's an argument both ways. What an employee who was working here can go, can give notice and go to work anywhere else he or she wants to, period. So, do you look at it from that perspective, or do you say,
I
no,
don't.
let's look at public service, let's look at the counties in Oregon. What about Clark County and Washington or Skamania County? I mean, where do you draw the boundaries?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're getting off.
Yeah, Josh?
Mary Faith, I think you were just talking about, yes, this ORS does specifically talk about the sheriff not making less than anybody in his office, his or her office, I apologize. We have 4 amazing female sheriffs, so you got to make sure to say that. Sorry. In the regular body of the ORS, it does say that, I'm looking for the exact words. When they talk about, comparing the budget, the employee supervised duties and responsibilities, it also says, and the compensation paid to subordinates and other appointed employees who serve in positions of comparable management responsibility. So I would argue that they are supposed to look at people that you do supervise that have similar managerial or supervisory type stuff. I would argue that that language is there for them to look at and compare you to people that or compare electeds to the people that report to you or do something similar. So I do think that language is there as a protection to show that that would be something you need to look at as well. Just on a side note, because you were talking about it.
Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, do you need anything else from us today?
I think Sean, so the most urgent item, which isn't urgent, but the first step is to convene the compensation board on hearing.
Yes. Or maybe before that, to have the conversations with them
Yeah,
about do they wanna serve in that? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Thank you, everyone, thanks very much, appreciate it. So this meeting is adjourned at 4:26 PM.
Oh, I don't have to, I don't care. Oh, yeah.
Hmm.